music only lasts for so long, so might as well dance while you still can.
I was a Year 2 nursing student from College East in 2006. I was attached to SGH for my IA, as it was part of my module to pass my course. It happened in Block 4, Level 3. I was attached to the ward there. Those who are nurses should know where I'm talking about. I have to spend 2 months there in that ward, as I was in my 3rd week. I was serving a patient. His kidney was 2nd stage renal failure, which means that he is not too far from 3rd stage, which will cause him to die. As I spent a week serving him, I got to know about his family and his life. He was quite a friendly uncle, which often helped me pass my time faster through my shifts in my attachment. So I kind of spent more time with him talking than the other patients. That's the good thing about being a student nurse. After spending a good 2 weeks serving him, he had really become a friend. Then, on a Friday afternoon, when it was the end of my shift, I bid my farewell to him and that I'd see him on Monday, a healthier man. Monday came. I came in as usual. It was 7:15 a.m. and I was alone sitting at the computer waiting for the change of shift. I saw my favorite uncle walking to pass the counter to the toilet. I called out to him saying, "Hey uncle, you can walk already? That's good, that's good. Slowly walk, okay? Or you want me to help you?" He replied calmly, "It's okay, boy. I'm good. You have been great help already. You got work to do, right? Go. Then, he continued walking on. As he went to turn the corner before to enter the gents, he turned and said, "Really? Boy, thank you so much." As a nurse, you get these kind of things a lot, so I went on doing my stuff. As the shift changed, and the passing of reports came, the report of my uncle was not mentioned in the daily report, so I inquired about my favorite uncle's status. All of the staff nurses were confused. "Why are you asking about him?" Then, I said I saw him walking to the toilet just now. All of the staff were shocked. Then one of the senior staff pulled me aside to ask me to stop talking. She then told me that he had died yesterday due to a sudden renal failure, which the doctors couldn't save. I did not believe it at first. I ran to check his former bed. None of his stuff were there. Then I ran to the toilet to check. No one was inside at all. I couldn't believe it. After a while, I accepted his death and went to read his case notes. He was pronounced dead the very same time as I saw him on that very day, 7:15 a.m.
My family moved into the house my mother still lives in 40 years ago. I was about 13 years old when we all moved in. I have so many beautiful memories growing up in that house. My father had a lot of beautiful chickens, quails and ducks, and loved them dearly. He fussed over them every day, but especially on weekends. Weekdays, he got up early to feed and water them before heading off to work. My father also loved his roses and had these amazing rose bushes in the front garden. On weekends, he would play Blondie and listen to her in the garden while gardening and looking after the ducks, quails and chickens. When I was 19 years old, my father was sadly diagnosed with throat cancer. He was treated. However, the cancer spread fast. The cancer was in his lungs and throat. My mother was devastated. My father and mother, they were childhood sweethearts. They met when my mother was 16 years old and married each other when my mother was 18. Neither of them ever wanted anyone else. They loved each other so much. It was beautiful to see that deep kind of love. The doctors told us they didn't know how long my father had left. They said we could take him home one last time for a visit, but to keep him warm and in bed and return the next day. My father lost so much weight. He went from a healthy 13 stones to skin and bone and 6 stones in a matter of 5 or 6 months. We all had a Barbie for my father the day he came home, and we made sure that all his 9 children were there that day. He was so happy that day. Later that night, his lungs collapsed and he died. My mother was right there with him when that happened. I got married in my late 20s, had 2 children and divorced 20 years later. When that happened, I moved back in with my mother for a while. From time to time, I would be watching TV or cooking in the kitchen or outside in the garden, and from the corner of my eyes, I would see my father. There was a gentle warmth about his presence. He never scared me. This happened quite often at my mother's place. My sister also confirmed seeing my father and feeling that warm presence. I know my father is looking after my mother, and I think because they had such a deep love for each other, he will always stay in that house with her. It's not every day that you find a love as strong as that. One that extends beyond this life and into the next.
This is a very strange and mysterious experience that I still don't have an answer for. It all started one morning when I was on the way to college. I was in a bit of a daze waiting for the traffic light to change so that I could cross the road when suddenly a man appeared next to me and asked,
"Are you my mom?"
Well, at the time, I was a 20-year-old college student and I didn't have any children. The man looked to me as if he was in his early 30s. Clearly, I wasn't his mom. It didn't make sense. Naturally, I was pretty surprised by his question. With a little laugh, I replied, "I think you've got the wrong person." When he heard my answer, he kind of screwed his face up. It was as if he had been given some bad news, or he didn't believe what I had just said. His expression almost said, "Why are you lying?" I didn't like it. So the second the light turned green, I power walked away from him. Sorry if it's a little rude to say this, but I think he might have not been all there, you know. He could have been a few sandwiches short of a picnic. He was very skinny and wide-eyed. It looked as if he had been wearing the same shirt for days. It was only partially buttoned up. He had a rucksack over one shoulder, too. I'm pretty sure he wasn't homeless, though. Just a little odd. This was my first encounter with him, but I've seen him countless times over the years. He would wait for me every day by the traffic light.
"Are you my mom?"
He'd ask. "No, I'm not," I'd reply. That's all he ever said. It was creepy, but I didn't feel like I needed to get the police involved. But then he started showing up in other places. He used to come to campus just to look for me. One day, it all got a bit too much for me. I was really stressed out with my studies and so sick of this weird guy following me around and asking that dumb question, so I yelled at him. I think I said something along the lines of,
"Don't come back again, you creep!"
I guess said is putting it mildly. I think screamed might be more accurate. After that, I didn't see him again. A year later, I graduated and went back to living at my parents' house while I was looking for work. One night, I got a call from a friend who was still living near my college. She said that she saw my friend, and I knew she meant him. She said that even though a year had passed, he spoke to her and asked about me.
Where's my mom gone?
He asked. She said he scared her, so she ran away. When she told me that, I didn't pay much attention to it. I just thought, oh, I remember that guy. And not much more. I didn't live there anymore, so I didn't care that much. But when I found a wilted carnation flower on my doorstep that year's Mother's Day, I started to get scared again. I instantly thought, it's him. After speaking about it with my dad, I went to the police. It was getting to be a little too much for me. The police said that there's no specific crime against leaving a flower on a doorstep. Also, I couldn't prove that it was him that had done it, and I wouldn't be able to give the police his name. I knew nothing about the guy. I wasn't happy with the outcome, but I understood it. But I couldn't help but feel anxious after that for a while. Several months went by, and the nights drew in, and the air grew colder. One snowy winter's night, I was taking a walk. I was walking the sidewalks of my city with no real plan in place. It was cold, but very scenic. I trotted carefully as there was a lot of ice and snow on the streets. Then, something happened. Something that would change my life forever. I heard the screech of tires. I turned to see a car skidding and colliding with other parked vehicles. I saw a pileup unfold in front of my eyes. I saw the unavoidable. A car came skidding towards me, and it was too late for me to get out of its way. I awoke after an unknown period of time, and I found myself wedged underneath a fallen tree and close to a car on its side. I hurt everywhere, and I couldn't move a muscle. I was likely in shock, too. My back felt as if it were frozen to the floor. I just felt like a dead weight. Pain pulsed through my body to the rhythm of my heartbeat. I felt so hurt and so helpless. Then, the car next to me went up in flames. I struggled against the weight of the tree, but it was no good. I was too hurt and too weak. I felt that it was the end for me. It was a terrifying realization. I heard a voice. I heard it as clear as a bell.
Mom! Mom!
The voice was calling. I heard that man's voice. Without a thought, I screamed back at him.
"Help me! I'm here! I'm here!"
He was covered in blood. It looked like he was involved in the same accident that I was. He heaved the falling tree off of my body and dragged me away from the flaming car. I watched as he dragged me through snow in amazement. I was wrestling internally with the rage of feelings and emotions. I was hurt, shocked, relieved, frightened, you name it. My injuries didn't look half as bad as his. I don't know how he was still moving. Maybe the adrenaline was keeping him going, or maybe it was his desire to rescue me. Who knows? Once we were a decent distance away from the wreckage, he looked at me, smiled, and then asked,
Are you my mom?
I felt an indescribable feeling in that moment. Words couldn't ever do it justice. Without thought, I heard myself respond, "Yes." I nodded slightly, and then I burst into tears. I cried more than I've ever cried in my life. I was positively wailing. I wiped my eyes clean. It took longer than normal because I was hurting. And when I looked up again, he was gone. In what felt like a split second, he was gone. I was alone, lying on the snow, with the strangest feeling deep in my heart. I haven't seen him in years. I don't know what he was, but I don't think he was a ghost or anything paranormal. He was as real as you or I. Sometimes, when it snows, I think about that time and I think about him. Memories of an unknown son. I hope he's doing okay, wherever he is. I am sad I never got to thank him.
A few years ago now, I'm not sure how many at this point, I was partying with some friends in our apartment complex. We drank, we smoked, the whole crew was there. That night, our friend, we'll call her Nikki, had her brother, who we'll call Chris, come out to hang out with us because he was going through a divorce and was having a hard time of things. As we drank and smoked, Chris didn't touch much, just enjoyed the company as we watched a movie and had some laughs. As the party ended though, Chris left, only to come back a little later to drop something off and say his goodbyes to everyone. He didn't make it home that night. No one knows what happened, but his car flipped and he was trapped inside as it caught fire. Nikki called and texted me late into the night to tell me that her brother had just died. I remember saying that surely she must have had another brother because Chris was sober. There was no way it could have been him. We mourned him for a while, still loved and in our thoughts always. I remember I talked to his obituary pamphlet from time to tell him how much Nikki loved and missed him. Time went on, and another one of our friends came to visit, bringing me a messy bushel of sunflowers she pulled from a field for me. I set them up in a vase in my empty windowsill and let them be. Some odd time had passed, minutes, maybe an hour, and I came back to my window to peek outside, only to find a neatly laid packet of flower food set beside my vase. "Hey, I thought you said you grabbed these from a field." My friend nodded to me. "Yeah, I saw them on the way here and thought you'd like them." We looked at each other for a minute, and I held up the packet of flower food to show her. "Dude, where did this come from?" We talked about it for a minute and boiled it down to, "Man, that's crazy." Later that night, sitting outside with our friends, I started telling Nikki about this mysterious flower food. Immediately, she cracked a smile. "That sounds just like my brother, always harping about that damn flower food." I like to think he left it there for me. I kept those sunflowers alive for as long as I could, enjoying the thought that, just maybe, Chris had been thinking about us. Rest in peace, brother. We miss you.
The best man of our wedding and my husband's lifelong best friend Terry died around 2 years after we were married. It was very sudden and unexpected. We'd even joked with him over the phone the night before. He died in his sleep. My husband was asked to be a pallbearer for the funeral. We were so poor when we first started out, it literally took every penny we had, $700, to buy my husband a sports coat for the funeral. My husband is 6'8" tall and over 300 pounds, so it had to be custom made. It's easy if you are tall or big, not so much if you're tall and big. We could not afford an entire suit. This happened in December so we decided not to celebrate Christmas that year since all of our money went towards the sports coat. We were bummed, but what can you do? Then we started finding money everywhere. I found a 50 in the dryer after doing laundry. The company my husband worked for decided to drop the employees off at the local gambling town, tackiest Christmas party idea ever for one evening. I took 1 quarter and put it in a slot machine just out of boredom and won $300. My husband found money in his wallet, and we both found money hidden in our desks. We ended up with exactly $700, so we were able to celebrate Christmas after all. A few months later, we moved to the house we live in now, and the strangeness came with us. My husband and Terry were roommates before our wedding, and they fought like 2 little old ladies. My husband liked to watch TV in the evenings, Terry did not, and for a while our TV would only come on if I pushed the button on the remote. It would not work for my husband at all. Out of frustration, my husband took things apart, determined to fix whatever was broken, but nothing was broken there. There was no logical reason it wouldn't work for him. Then Christmas rolled around again. Terry liked flashing lights on the trees, and my husband liked solid lights. Their fights about it as roommates were hilarious, and one would always change the setting when the other wasn't looking, and it went back and forth the entire time the tree was lit up. Well, we put up our tree and the lights were set to solid, of course, but every time my husband looked at the tree they were flashing, he would try to change that one bulb that decided if the rest flashed or stayed constantly lit, but that bulb would be correctly set. Then I would come home from work and my husband would be beside himself like a little old lady and demanded that I watch the lights. I did. They weren't flashing, but whenever I left the room they would flash. I thought it was hilarious and exactly the sort of thing Terry would do. Then we got a pug called Sarah. Terry and I both adored pugs. She was the cutest thing and I loved to play. One morning I was in the shower in the master bathroom. I could hear the doorstop on the other side of the house just twanging away, as it makes a very distinctive sound. If you have never heard it, go flick one and you'll hear it. At the time I thought, oh how funny, Sarah's playing with the doorstop. But I got out of the shower and Sarah was in the bathroom with me, and I could still hear the doorstop. So I laughed and told Terry to cool it, and it stopped. Silly things like this happened for a few years. Then one night I had a dream that I was talking with Terry. He was telling me how mad he was that he had died, and we reminisced about the good times the 3 of us had over the years. My husband said I was laughing and then crying in my sleep all night. He tried to wake me but couldn't. I figured that was his goodbye, as the fun and silliness stopped after that. My best friend since 8th grade, Sarah, the pug was named after her with her permission, fought a long battle with breast cancer that had spread to her brain. Then, I was diagnosed with brain cancer. For a while, we didn't know which one of us was going to outlive the other. I won, so of course, we joked about it. I promised not to divulge the more sordid details of her teen/early 20s love life. I made her promise to tell funny stories about me at my celebration of life. I just want everyone to eat barbecue and laugh, not cry in a church. I just asked that she please edit stories as needed to keep it clean. She agreed to keep everything appropriate for all ages. We also promised to haunt each other after we passed, which she did sadly in March of 2021. That summer, my husband and I were living in the room and heard the loudest bang come from our laundry room. It was gunshot loud. We were afraid the washing machine blew up because we had just replaced the dryer, and that's usually how things go for us. We opened the laundry room door, and the giant Costco-sized jug of laundry soap somehow fell off the flat surface of the dryer. The container broke, and soap was everywhere. The more we tried to clean it up, the sudsier it got. I did the splits several times in the process and not by choice. It was truly a horrible mess. As I'm cleaning and being super annoyed, my husband said he thought it was Sarah doing her promised haunting. One thing about Sarah was that she loved her puns. So, he said this was her clean joke to pull on me. I didn't mind cleaning up the soap so much after he said that. May you all have best friends who haunt you in the best way possible.
This takes place at the end of January, and I had just finished a sweep of the mountain and was on my way back down to close the main gate. A strong northerly wind blew the powdery snow down below to the left of the valley. It looked like a miniature snowstorm. It was interesting, so I stopped and watched it from my vantage point. I noticed something close to that snowstorm, the figure of a person. It was standing there, watching the snowstorm too. Since it was getting late and cold, I went down to speak with them. I drew closer to the figure, and as I did, I heard that whoever was out there was talking. It sounded like someone was having a conversation. The person's voice was only audible during the pauses of the wind's relentless howling. The figure was speaking to someone, I'm sure of it. The only issue was I couldn't see who it was speaking to. I wondered if someone was hurt or lost. I got a little concerned. As I got closer, I discovered that I recognized the person. The snow and lack of light had been obscuring my view. I knew that guy. He lived on my street. We used to be good friends at school. I called out to him, "Hey, what the hell are you doing out here?" When I called out to him, he slowly turned to face me. He had a very sober and stern look on his face. "Oh, hey, what are you talking about?" he replied to me. "What? Anyway, it looked like he was speaking to someone just then, by the way. I don't see anyone out here. Who are you speaking to?" "Oh, yeah, I was speaking to Sholta." "What?" I stood there stunned for a moment or two. I didn't expect him to say that. Sholta was his son. Sadly, his boy passed away. Childhood cancer. He died aged 7, just on the cusp of spring. The loss of his son hadn't taken a visible toll on him. In fact, that was the first time he mentioned his boy's name after the funeral. He didn't seem to have changed all that much after his son had passed, except he was very quiet to the point where he wouldn't say a thing. If we were ever at an event or a party, he would just sit somewhere off to the side and keep quiet with a sullen look on his face. That wasn't that different to how he was before his son passed. I never saw him grieve though. Even at Shota's funeral, he kept silent. He was just watching his poor wife, bawling her eyes out. He looked up and appeared to glare at the attendees. He stared at us. He stared at us all, like we were his enemies. Seeing him like that, I guessed that he was struggling internally with his emotions, or at least he didn't want to show everyone how he was feeling. It could have been pride or shame. I'm guessing though, who am I to say how he was feeling? It just looked to me like he was suppressing it all, burying his pain, and it was 9 months after the funeral that I saw him out on my mountain range talking to the biting wind. "I was just out here for a walk. I really like it here. I heard a voice. I felt as if I was being called by someone. I turned to see who it was, and then I saw Sholta stood right there." I listened to the man. I didn't know what else I could do. The wind died down, and the whole mountain range fell eerily silent. It felt to me like time had stood still, like the mountains wanted to hear his story too. "Sholta, do you know what he said to me?" He said, "Don't be mean to Mum." I knew that my friend could be mean. My wife had overheard him scolding his son before he passed. He apparently kept telling the boy, "Don't cry, nothing gets solved by crying." That should give you an idea of the person he is. Everyone knows everything in small towns. Word travels fast. "I know I can be horrible sometimes. I don't mean to be. I guess I can't help it sometimes." It sounded like he was truly contemplating the advice his son had given him from beyond the grave. I looked away, and then back, and Sholta was gone. He tilted his head back and stared skyward. He kept on talking, unusually loud for him. "It really worried me, to be pleaded with and to be preached to by my son. After I hadn't seen him in so long, I felt angry And I felt pity. I feel a lot of things right now. And I also don't know how to feel. He kind of just trailed off, but continued to stare at the sky. Grief. What a terrible thing that is, eh? You know me. I rarely cry, but look at me now. I wonder when these tears will stop flowing. Tears were cascading down his face, white puffs of exhalation plumed with every sob. The pain in that man's heart must have been unbearable. Before long, his cheeks were wet. Then the guy howled, literally from the pit of his stomach. It was as if it was all coming out of him. His tears were falling. I watched as they slipped silently down through the snow. And just off to the side of the spot I saw the tears, I saw 2 indentations in the powdered snow. One set of footprints, which undoubtedly could only belong to a child. Before long, a sharp gust signaled the return of the wind, and it began to whip up again, and the footprints were buried under the freshly blown snow. They were gone. They were gone physically, but I don't think he would ever forget them. They must be burned into his memories. We both descended the mountain as the sun waned, and when we got to the bottom, I saw him in the fluorescent light of the street lamps. I saw that stony, sullen expression had begun to lift. I didn't see that expression again after that. I always think back to that experience when the first snow of winter begins to lift and the ice begins to thaw. Just like the ice in his heart, I guess.
This story happened to my friend. I have no intentions of provoking the dead person I'm going to relate. My friend's boyfriend rides a bike. They were very much in love, and their relationship was at its peak when her boyfriend met with a fatal accident. I think he died on the spot. My friend was devastated and depressed, and it was really sad for someone so close to leave so suddenly. A few days after the accident, while she was doing something in her room, she heard chains outside her bedroom. I'm not trying to exaggerate the incident, but it really did happen. The sound of the chain became clearer. My friend looked out of her room into the living room, and that was where she saw her boyfriend, standing there wearing the exact same clothes he was wearing on the day of the accident. She was scared, but it was her boyfriend after all. He was holding onto her helmet and looking at her. She believed that her boyfriend had came back to say goodbye. I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences before. From my point of view, the chain sounds might be some things that happened after his death. He might be chained before he was brought to the netherworld. Or it might be his bike chains that got caught in his body while he crashed.
This experience happened in May of 1979 when I was 15 years old. My maternal grandmother had passed maybe a week or two before this event. I always loved going to her house as a child and spending the night. She was a wonderful grandma. She moved to California after her last husband died in 1976, so I didn't get to see her for the last 3 years of her life. I was a freshman in high school, and in English class, we were reading Romeo and Juliet. I had stayed up late that night while my parents slept to watch Romeo and Juliet on our local PBS station, so I was the only one awake at the time. I was laying on the floor of the living room with my pillow and blanket, and only the television was on. All the lights in the house were off. I'd never really had any odd things happen to me in our home and was quite comfortable being up alone with no lights. A little explanation of how our house was laid out. The living room was in the front of the house, with the dining room and kitchen directly behind the living room. The area between the living room and dining room is completely open, while the kitchen area is blocked from the living room by the wall for the stairs going to the basement. You could walk from the living room into the dining room to the kitchen and to the front hallway, which brings you back into the living room. Between the kitchen and front hallway is the basement stairs, and if you go the other direction, it's a hallway to the 3 bedrooms and bathroom. I was on the floor with my pillow and blanket, watching TV, when I heard the sound of flip-flop shoes come from the kitchen into the dining room and right up behind my dad's reclining chair. The back of it was towards the open dining room, and it was maybe 3 feet behind me. Now, my grandma always wore flip-flops in the summer. It was a sound that I associated with her. I've always loved the paranormal and accepted it as a part of my life. My mom had told me things that happened to her as a child and as an adult since I was little. But when I heard the flip-flops, I was basically frozen in fear. I called out in a small voice, "Mom?" Even though I knew it was not her. No answer. I knew she was sleeping and never wore those type of shoes or even owned a pair. I can't even remember if I was brave enough to look behind the chair. I grabbed my pillow and blanket and turned off the TV. Dad would have yelled at me had I left it on, but I ran out there like a frightened rabbit. I'm not sure how I navigated the first corner. It was completely dark in the house, but when I made the second turn to go into the hallway to the safety of my room, I miscalculated the turn and ran directly into the wall. Luckily, I had my blanket draped over my arm, otherwise, I might have broken it. When I hit the wall, all my mind could think was that I ran into a person, most likely the ghost of my grandma. I was struck with crazy terror before I figured out it was just a wall and that I had made the turn too soon. Into the safety of my room, lights on, door locked, and under my blanket, I slowly calmed myself down. I don't remember for sure, but I think I slept with the lights on that night. I told my mom about it the next morning. She asked me why I was so scared. It made me realize that my grandma would never hurt me, and that maybe she just wanted to see me one last time, or say goodbye. That was so true. She wouldn't hurt me, and I've thought about it over the years. It's really very sweet that she came to me that night. There's no way that anyone will ever convince me that this didn't happen. I was 100% awake at the time, and it was most certainly my grandma. Years later, when my first child, my daughter, was 2, she came to me again, and that time, I really believe she saved my life. I'll save that story for another time.
I experienced a somewhat scary event after our housemaid died. Scary at the time, but looking back, not so much. This housemaid of ours has taken care of us since I was a small child, and luckily, I got a chance to see and spend time with her until I entered first grade. This housemaid, Ate Saling, was always so very nice to us. She took care of us whenever my cousin's mum was not around and always made sure that we were okay, even though my cousin and I would always play pranks on her. She was much more a part of the family than just a housemaid. Since I was the youngest in the household, whenever she would go out and no one was around the house to look after me, she would always take me with her. After asking permission from my aunt, of course. Usually, she would just visit her relatives until late in the afternoon. Then, we'll go to the Sari store in our subdivision, and she would treat me with the asulabong bread. It was longer and bigger than today's, and it only cost 5 pesos back then. Filipinos in their mid and late 20s will know what I'm talking about. After that, we would finally head back home. One day, I noticed that she was not around the house, and it made me wonder then. Until my aunt told me that Ate Seling had died from a heart attack. Back then, I didn't know how serious the word dead was, so I didn't cry, but I did know that we'll never see her again. I can't remember what day this actually happened, but maybe the night or a day after Ate Seling died, she made her presence known to me. Just before I was about to fall asleep, the edge of my bed, on the right side, suddenly dipped, like someone just sat there. I was alone in my room, so I knew that it was something not normal. I was too scared to look. I just covered myself with my blanket and kept my eyes closed. After a few moments, that feeling of someone sitting on my bed did not go away, but instead, it moved, and I felt someone hugging me. This scared me a lot, so I immediately left the room, carrying my pillow, and came knocking to my mother's room to spend the night there. And well, I actually slept there for days. The next morning, after I told everyone what happened, my aunt said that maybe it was Ate Seling saying her last goodbye to me. She was practically the one who took care of us until her last days of being our housemaid. This event, it does not really scare me anymore, but instead, I find it beautiful, as I truly loved Ate Seling, as I know she loved me.
This happened when I was in the 3rd year of junior high school. It was the year that I had to transfer and join a new school. It was a horrible time for me. I was bullied relentlessly at my new school. They picked on me for having a feminine face, in their opinion, of course. I am a boy. I also didn't get my height until I got into high school, so I was pretty short for my age. When you couple that with the fact that I was the new kid, I was pretty much walking into school each morning with a target on my back. At first, it was just a name calling, and I thought that if I ignored it, it wouldn't last long. But I was wrong. It escalated. I guess I should have said something back to them or fought back. I'm not sure if it would have mattered though. One day at school, I was surrounded by this gang of boys who bullied me in the bathroom. Fair warning, this part's a bit graphic, but it might help explain why I didn't tell anyone what was happening at that age. I was forced to ingest the contents of a used toilet. They brought gloves, they restrained me, and forced me to swallow that filth. After they were satisfied with their work, they left, and I ran out of the bathroom. I ran to an alley at the back of the school. It was a place where other students never really went. It wasn't outside of the school grounds. It was just this kind of gap, near the aircon vents. I threw up there and sat on the floor with my head in my hands, crying my eyes out. After a while, I felt as if someone was looking for me. I wiped my eyes and looked up, hoping the gang of bullies weren't back. They weren't. There was a girl stood there looking at me. She was in the year below me. I could tell because we have different colored badges on our uniforms at that school for each year group. She asked, "Are you okay?" And I replied, "I'm fine," and sat there, silently. The bell sounded out, break was over, and it was time to go back to class. I didn't want to go back to class. I thought that she would walk off, but she didn't. She sat on the ground next to me. I said to her, "Class is about to start," and she replied, "That's fine." A moment or two went by, and then she asked, "Why were you crying?" I don't know why, but I told her about the bullying. Maybe because she was the first person at this school who was nice to me. She listened to my every word and responded with non-verbal cues, which encouraged me to keep talking to her. Hearing what I was unable to tell the teachers and my parents caused me to cry even more. I said at one point, "I just want to die." Then the girl said, "Dying doesn't stop the pain. I'm being bullied too, you know, and I don't know. I'm just trying to do my best." In that moment, I felt very warm. This was brought on by her kindness and the sense of security she gave me. We promised to one another that if either of us was bullied, we would meet here, in the alley, to be there for one another. After that day, the bullying continued, but it never reached the heights of what happened in the bathroom again. Every time it happened, I would go back to the alley, at the back of the school, and look for her. She was always there waiting for me, and we would talk and life wouldn't seem so bad. We didn't talk much about bullying after our first meeting. We would talk about things that made us happy. We would recount our days and share our happy memories. Talking with her was the definition of the word salvation. I noticed that the bullies fell out with one another, and their little so-called gang split up. It was really great to see that. The bullying was over, but we still met behind the school. Graduation day was approaching, and when it did come, I realized that I was in love with her. I asked her if she would meet me in our usual spot on graduation day, and she said yes. However, when graduation day finally came, I went to the alley and she wasn't there. I waited there for a long time, and she didn't turn up. I'm sure that she wanted to see me one last time before we left school. I couldn't understand it, so I went to the staff room and asked my teacher. I asked her if my friend was absent that day. The teacher asked me what year she was in, and I replied. Her name was an uncommon name, so when I mentioned it, the teacher looked at me really surprised. She looked through the list of names in the register, and then after a while she asked me if I was sure I had the right year group. I said I was sure. I saw the badge on her uniform, so I knew which year she was in. My teacher then said, "We did used to have a student by that name, but she isn't at the school anymore. She hasn't been here for 3 years." I asked what happened to her, and the teacher said that she passed away and wouldn't say any more than that. The outcome was ambiguous. I didn't get to meet her at graduation or ever again. I still have no clue if she was a spirit, a student, or something my bullied psyche created at the time to help me cope with the pain. If it was the latter, then it's a hell of a coincidence. It doesn't matter if I ever get the answers required to stop me asking myself about who she was. If she is a spirit, then I hope she remains at that school to help anyone else who might be going through what I was. I thank her from the bottom of my heart for giving me the strength to carry on and push those dark thoughts I had at the time aside. To this day, I consider her the best friend I have ever had. No matter what you are going through, it gets better.
This story happened to my older sister 6 years ago. She was 23 then and was supposed to marry her boyfriend. She loved her boyfriend, Sean, so much because he was really caring and a wonderful guy. She was really excited about the thought of being married and spending the rest of their life together. Sean is working as a marketing manager for a property developer firm. Therefore, his job always requires him to travel overseas. Every time he has to leave for his overseas trip, he always brings my sister out for a picnic to the East Coast the day before he leaves. They would sit and talk to the sunsets. Sean would always do anything to make my sister feel happy and assures his love for her. 2 months before the wedding, Sean was asked to attend a property expedition in London and is expected to be in London for about 4 days. My sister was a bit upset, but Sean, being the gentleman that he is, assures my sister that he will be back and that he will get a surprise gift for their wedding. As usual, he took my sister out for a picnic on Sunday as he is leaving on Monday morning. My sister felt uneasy about this trip, but Sean assures her that he will be safe and reminded her to look forward to their wedding. It was already Friday night, and Sean is expected to reach Singapore on Saturday afternoon. That night, my sister could not sleep because she is feeling excited that her beloved Sean will be by her side tomorrow afternoon onwards. I remember this because we were talking about the wedding plans and she was giving me ideas on what to wear. It was already 2:30 a.m. and we both felt sleepy and we eventually fell asleep. The next thing that happened was beyond anybody's explanation. When I woke up the next morning at about 9 a.m., I found my mom hugging my sister while my sister is crying very loudly. My dad was on the phone. When I asked him, he told me that Sean had been robbed and murdered in London and that they are now arranging to fly his body to Singapore. However, my sister kept on insisting that it's not Sean. Apparently, she said that Sean had called her at about 3:30 a.m. and said that he is outside our house and that he would like to bring my sister to the beach and watch the sunrise. My sister was so surprised that he reached Singapore earlier than expected. Anyways, he drove her to the East Coast and they hugged each other throughout the morning. My sister said that he was really quiet and his body was really cold too. My sister thought that he must have come down with a fever, but he just put his finger to my sister's lips and smiled. My sister thought he looked a bit pale too under the dim lights. Anyways, right after the sunset, Sean drove my sister home and told her that he needs to sleep. At our doorstep, he hugged my sister and then lovingly looked into her eyes and said that she's the best thing that has ever happened to him and that he will never stop loving her, even when he's dead. My sister scolded him for mentioning the word dead and that she does not want to lose him. When he kissed her on the lips, my sister said that his lips felt cold and dry. About 30 minutes after Sean left, there was a phone call. It was Sean's sister. She got a call from Sean's colleague that Sean's badly battered body was found in an abandoned office building and they are now waiting for the authorities to release his body to fly back to Singapore. That was when my sister shouted over the phone and broke down. When my parents ran out of the room, they saw my sister screaming hysterically by the phone. They too were shocked when Sean's sister told them what happened. It took about 3 days for Sean's body to reach Singapore. By the time people came for the funeral, his coffin had been sealed tightly to prevent people from looking at his badly bruised body. Even my sister was not allowed to see it despite her pleas. Sean's colleague who went to London with him went up to my sister and gave her a nicely wrapped package. He said that Sean had bought this for her. When she opened it, it was a beautiful platinum and crystal bracelet with their names engraved on the platinum surface. My sister fainted. My sister and I strongly believe that Sean's soul had actually came to see her on that sad day. This is how much love he has for her, and that even death can't take that away. Now she is 29 and she is putting all her effort into work and us. She doesn't want to be involved in another relationship. To her, Sean will always be the light of her life and no other man can take that place. May God reunite them in heaven.
So this happened to me back in 2017 when I was just about to turn 18. For a bit of context that will be important, I seem to have the same problem that a lot of men have where I can't find something sometimes, even when it's right in my face. This deeply annoyed my mom, and any time that I would ask her to help me find something and it would be in plain sight, she would pick it up and throw it at me and roll her eyes really hard. Back to the day in question. My mom had just been pulled off of life support after being pronounced legally brain dead. The choice was up to me, and I knew that she wouldn't want a life like that. So, on the evening of the day I had told the doctors to pull the plug, My uncle, who'd come from another state to help me get affairs in order, had made scalloped potatoes for dinner. After we had finished eating, I went into the kitchen to put away the leftovers. I put the casserole dish they were made in on the stove and walked over to the pantry to grab the cling wrap. I looked for a minute or two and could not find it. In my emotionally raw state, I began to lose my temper and loudly exclaimed, "Where the fuck is it?" After a moment or two, I saw a swift blur of movement above my head as the cling wrap flew off the second-to-top shelf and hit me right in the face, but it wasn't very hard. It took me a moment to process what had happened. I stood there in complete shock, and then I kind of broke down in the middle of the kitchen. I tried to think of anything it could have been, trying to convince myself it couldn't have been her. But I have come up empty.
The days leading up to my father's passing were laden with an unspoken heaviness. The air in the hospital room clung to a sense of impending sorrow, and the soft hum of medical equipment was a constant reminder that time was slipping away. His once strong hands, weathered by a lifetime of hard work, now lay fragile and useless on the sterile sheets. We sat by his bedside, my mother and I, both caught in the ebb and flow of hope and despair. His breathing was shallow, each exhale carrying the weight of a life well lived. The lines etched on his face told tales of joy and struggle, a narrative that only deepened as we confronted the inevitable. As the evening wore on, his grasp on consciousness weakened. The room, bathed in a soft glow of dimmed lights, became a cocoon where the boundaries between life and death blurred. In those moments, I held his hand, seeking solace in the fleeting connection between us. When the final breath escaped him, a profound stillness settled in the room. Tears flowed freely, a mix of grief and relief, as we grappled with the reality of his departure. Yet, amidst the sorrow, there lingered a peculiar warmth, a whisper of love that defied the finality of death. As the night deepened and the world outside slumbered, I found myself unable to sleep. The weight of loss pressed upon me, and the silence of the house echoed with memories of a presence now absent. It was then, in the hushed stillness, that I felt an otherworldly touch, a gentle caress on the edges of my awareness. A distant creak echoed through the hallway, like a muted step. The air seemed to hum with a melody only my heart recognized. I strained to listen, hoping for a sign, and that's when I heard it. The soft murmur of my father's voice, as if carried on a breeze from another realm.
Don,
the voice whispered, a familiar cadence that sent shivers down my spine.
I'm here. I love you.
The room felt charged with an energy that was more than tangible. I closed my eyes, allowing the spectral presence to envelop me. It was not a vision I saw, but a sensation, an ethereal dance of emotions that painted a vivid tapestry in my mind. Memories flooded back, not as images but as emotions. Laughter shared around the dinner table. Advice given during difficult moments in my life. The quiet pride in his eyes at my achievements. It was as if time folded and we existed in a shared space between worlds. Dad, I whispered into the silence. I miss you. His response was a gentle breeze, a brush against my cheek that carried the essence of his love. The room, once a mere vessel of grief, transformed into a sanctuary where the boundary between the living and the departed melted away. As the night unfolded, we conversed, not in spoken words, but in the language of the heart. I shared my fears, my triumphs, and the ache of his absence. He, in turn, conveyed a sense of peace and an unwavering connection that not even death could sever. The visitation was not a visual spectacle, but a symphony of emotions, a sonorous exchange of love and understanding that defied the limitations of mortal senses. In those transcendent hours, I felt the weight of grief lift, replaced by a profound gratitude for the time we had shared. With the first light of dawn, the spectral presence waned. The room, once filled with an otherworldly glow, returned to its mundane existence. The whispers grew faint, and the tangible connection dissolved, leaving behind a lingering sense of warmth. In the wake of that encounter, I found solace. The grieving process became a journey, not just of loss, but of a deeper understanding, a recognition that love, in its purest form, transcends the boundaries of life and death.
When I was pregnant with my first child, my great-grandfather passed away. At his funeral, I made comments saying how I really wish he could have made it to see my daughter born, as she was the first of his great-great-grandchildren. Fast forward a few months at like 5 a.m., I woke up having a contraction. I sat up, and standing at the foot of my bed was my great-grandfather, but he quickly disappeared. Later on at the hospital, I was telling my mom about this, and she said she keeps finding pennies in odd places this morning too. She has a theory that loved ones who move on leave coins around for us. She literally finished this sentence, and I looked down on my big pregnant belly, and there's a penny. I suppose he wanted us to know he was still able to be there.
To start out, you need a little backstory to show how I got into this situation. When I got out of high school around 2003, finding a job was difficult, so I took whatever horrible jobs I could to get by. When I found a job cleaning fire and water damage full-time, I was excited to have steady income and start saving, but this quickly turned into a nightmare that I had to endure for almost 2 years. The company I worked for put me on my first job, which was a water damage claim where the basement flooded with sewage. So after a few days of work, we finished and it was on to the next job. My boss then called me into his office the next morning and told me about a special crew that he was setting up and asked if I would be the crew leader, supervising 3 other guys that were just hired. I found this strange, as I had only been working there a total of around 3 days, but figured my work ethic was already paying off and I would get a raise. I only made 10 an hour to start. Not only did I not get the raise, but I got no training in the new position other than a work van and cleaning material, and the phone numbers for the 3 guys that were also hired to do the fire and water damage cleanup. The boss told me what tools were best to use and what cleaning products to use to sanitize, along with where everything was located in the van, with hazmat suits and respirators. But he was vague about what kind of things I would clean up. He just said the situations were always different, and I would get detailed instructions on each job. He called my position CSC Crew Leader. The boss told me that I would never have to see the deceased, as the coroner would have the remains gone by the time my crew got there, and to use my logic to determine what needed to be removed from the homes and what could be cleaned. The first job I had in my new position, which the boss told me about when I got to the office, was cleaning up the remains of an elderly man or woman who died in their house and had been laying in a chair. When we arrived, the coroner had me come inside to show me a few things that were considered hazardous material and needed to be removed due to the risk of disease. I guess my boss knew a few people from the county coroner's office, and much of the work came from their recommendations. Not only was the deceased still in the house, but was fully visible to me and the other guy, and you could smell the rot through the masks, as the house had no AC, and this was mid-June. The coroner was backed up and was waiting on additional people to show up to load the body as it was falling apart. And I call the body it because I honestly couldn't tell if it was male or female, and was trying not to look too long as it was disturbing. The other 3 guys I worked with handled it well, but 2 got sick from the smell and had to go outside to puke. We all waited outside after the coroner showed us the chair. The fluids had leaked into the carpet and the basement, where the fluids went through the subfloor and puddled on some boxes in the basement. The coroner's support arrived and took the deceased out, and me and the crew started working. After about 5 minutes, weird things started to happen. The first of which was when I began to disassemble the chair. I had removed the back off the chair and was putting it into the special hazmat bags that I was given, and the base started to rock when I was about 10 feet away, putting the bag with the back of the chair by the front door. No one else was in the same room, as the other guys were in the basement dealing with moving boxes. I brushed it off and took apart the base of the chair as much as I could, and when I got into the bag, I got a chill up my back and then began feeling sick. I just figured it was the shock of what I was cleaning hitting me, and pushed on, even though the chill was strange, as I was very hot in a full hazmat suit. Next was removing the carpet and assessing the floor to see if it would be able to be cleaned, or if I had to remove a section of the floor. So I called the boss to ask him, and he told me to pour the special cleaner on the area to soak into the floorboards, and it would be fine. So I got it out of the truck where he said it was and brought it inside. When I got inside, all 3 of the guys in the basement were scrambling to get out, tripping over each other, and all of them ran outside. When I asked them what was up, all 3 said there was someone in the cluttered basement, and they assumed it was a homeless person or junkie. Detroit has many issues with these kinds of things. I listened at one of the open windows to the basement. It's kind of the first thing we did when we started working. Open any windows possible, prop the doors open, so maybe someone got inside then, or possibly before we got there and was hiding. After listening a few minutes and hearing nothing, me and another of the workers went inside, armed with a mag light and a piece of metal fence post, and searched the basement. Nothing was down there but footprints of the shoe covers we used, but when we started up the stairs, we heard a horrible hacking cough from somewhere in the basement. When we looked for it, there was nothing, but the corner of the basement had a bunch of dust stirred up, like someone was moving things very recently. That weirded us both out. We called the guys back in and they got back to the boxes, but all of them kept feeling like they were being touched while throwing away material from the boxes that got fluids on them. I went back to my upstairs job, but found that the cleaner I put next to the floorboards was gone, and I started getting frustrated as it was the only jug I had of this cleaner, and I clearly remember it being next to the area before the guys ran up the stairs, and my attention was redirected. I began to take out trash, figuring I would find it eventually, or the basement guys took it for the floor, and I found it on its side, behind the bag that had the back of the chair. This is important. There were like 6 other bags in front of this one near the front door, and this was a gallon bottle of cleaner. Again, I got a chill, but this was one brought on by what sounded like a whisper that I could not make out the words to. I cleaned the floorboards and moved out trash. Job complete. That night, each member of my crew had a dream about an older man telling us that we're not welcome in his home, touching his belongings, and we need to leave. In my dream, I was alone in his house. The old man cried and told me I was destroying his things and he couldn't replace anything. He was trying to push me out of his house, but it was like I was ignoring him. Even when he would push me and scream at me, no reaction from me. He then threw my cleaner into the garbage pile I had made by the front door, exactly where I found it. 2 of the 3 guys in the crew told me their dreams about the old man pushing them as they went through the boxes of ruined pictures and other old stuff that needed to be thrown out due to the risk of disease from his fluids. They also said that it was like they had no control and were on autopilot. They said they were so sad but couldn't do anything. The thing that got me about the dreams of the other 2 guys was they both said the man was getting so upset that he began violently coughing, and that the man kept grabbing their arms when they would touch boxes or throw things into the trash. Neither of the guys were in the house when me and the other guy heard the coughing from the basement. The guy that went into the basement with me said he had a dream, but all he remembered was waking up sad, like he did something wrong, and had a horrible coughing fit, which might just be a coincidence, but I connected it in my mind as relating to the other dreams. We all talked about it and came to the conclusion that we were all just having a reaction to a situation, and it was nothing more than our brains coping with what we had to do. I'm very into psychology, so I rationalized it as best I could, and we hoped for a better assignment the next day. The next few jobs were not so bad. Cleaning up blood at the home invasion. No casualty, but a huge mess. Then there was a few other bloody crime scenes with casualties, but nothing notable happened. About 2 weeks into the job, we began to learn the tricks of the trade, and we split into 2 different groups that I was responsible to manage as crew leader. So I would have to go to different sites if the other 2 guys had an issue or don't know what to do. I thought I was getting used to the job as well as the other guys, as we had no other experiences like the first job, but I was wrong. The last experience I'll share happened in mid-July in a very bad area in Detroit. There had been an incident where a guy supposedly tried to abduct a child, was stopped by people in the neighborhood who beat the man badly, and he escaped to his house, where the neighborhood quickly called the police, and civilians surrounded the man's house to prevent escape. The police response time in this area is horrible, and the people were throwing rocks through the man's window and damaged his car. The man was hurt bad by the mob and was hurt by a rock or glass and died in the home. This is assumption by DPD, and from what the police officer told me, it was a misunderstanding and the man picked up a girl that was injured riding her bike, and some kids that knew her told their parents that the man was kidnapping her. The people overreacted and the man was brutally beaten. The cleanup was pretty simple to do. We secured windows, cleaned up blood and bodily fluid, but as soon as I entered the house, I just felt a wave of fear and sadness, like I had never felt this before, and it hit in waves and made my legs weak. My working buddy who was there showed up late and didn't get the story from the cop like I did, but experienced the same feelings I had. The whole time we were there, we saw a form darting around corners, like it was watching us, then hiding. It was similar to like a small bit of fog or mist. We also heard very slight cries for help coming from several areas in the house, and also what sounded like, "Please stop," and long "No." A few times the crowd came back and yelled at the house also, and when this was going on, the activity in the house increased and we could hear running footsteps going upstairs, a door slam, and it sounded like the front door would open and close, but we never saw any of the doors move. The path of the footsteps sounded like the front door through the living room, to the bathroom, to stairs, to the upstairs bungalow room. The part that really got me was I could feel the floor impacts that felt like the vibrations of someone running past me when I was cleaning the areas, and each time I would be hit with one of those waves of fear and sadness. When we left the house, there were a few people on porches hanging out, like as usual during summer, and the people were still hostile and yelling random things, but directed at us as we were loading the van and took off hazmat suits. We ignored this, but before we had loaded all the material from the house into the van and locked the house, the front door slammed hard enough to sound like a gunshot, which scared me and my crew member, along with the people in the front porch, to the point where they went inside. The front door deadbolt was somehow locked, and we could not get it open. I think it was a different key than the knob, so we ended up leaving several boards in the house that were left over from boarding a few of the windows. The feeling of relief when I left the house was like night and day. Inside, I was anxious, scared, paranoid, and really down, which could be due to knowing the story, but when I got outside, it was like flipping a switch. I immediately felt better, and me and the other guy in my crew were joking and laughing about dumb stuff and normal 19 and 20-year-old shenanigans. I have many of these stories written down in detail in a journal I started after the first 3 months of working at this job. I talked to the other guys on the crew and got the other strange stories from them too. I know that some of this could very well be formed by my subconscious mind to cope with traumatic situations, but some of it has no explanation, and when I hear other members of my crew tell their stories when they haven't been influenced by mine, that is a horse of a different color. The job got way worse after I started the journal after 3 months in. Several experiences with what I think was paranormal. Many situations that stressed my mental state to the point where my mask of sanity started to slip. In the end, I worked at this place for almost 2 years, and of my crew, all died. 2 from suicides, 1 from drug overdose that could have been intentional, but we will never know. I just know that when these 3 guys, my age, around 19 and 20, started this job, we were normal, well-adjusted guys with no cares in the world other than girls, parties, and working. I watched each one of them slowly drain their joys and passion for life, and I know this sounds bad, but each one that died was considerate enough to die in a clean way. Mostly so another person wouldn't have to see all the horrible things that we all saw so often.
This happened when I was little. I think I was in the 2nd grade of elementary school at the time. My mother died when I was very young, so I was raised by my father. I guess that growing up in a household like that made me kind of introverted. When I was in the 1st year of elementary school, I was bullied relentlessly. So much so that I refused to go to school. If I was at school, I would do everything to try and escape. I hated it. My behavior was bad enough to get me sent to live with my mother's side of the family, way out in the countryside. I was living with my grandparents. I really hated the countryside. It was hard to believe that such a place so boring could even exist in the modern world. I felt like it was from a different time period. There weren't many kids my age in the area. I think there were only a couple of high school students. I was alright though, since I had already gotten used to my own company. I loved insects back then. I would just go out and go bug catching. I guess that was one good point of living in the countryside. There was an abundance of bugs to hunt for. I guess I spent about half a year in the countryside living like this. Things changed when I met a woman. She was probably in her late 20s or early 30s. She had long dark hair, and she was beautiful. "Hey, are you on holiday or something? I don't think I've seen you here before," she said. I was kind of shocked because I didn't expect her to speak to me. I noticed that she was gazing at my little plastic insect collecting cage. "Whoa, you got so many. Can I take a look?" she called out to me. Well, talking about insects is pretty much my favorite topic, so I couldn't believe my luck when she said that. I really enjoyed telling her everything I knew about the bugs I had. She was really complimentary and was hanging on my every word. I'd never had another person outside of my family praise me like that before. It was the best feeling ever. So from that day forward, I wanted to see her all the time and talk with her about bugs and stuff. She wanted to spend time with me too. We went looking for bugs in a field and even to a river. It was great. We would always agree to meet by the stone Jizol monument near the river. I would often speak to my grandfather about her, and he always said that it was someone's daughter in the village and she wouldn't be around long, and to leave them alone and don't annoy them. He didn't understand that we were friends. I didn't care. It was just so great to find a friend in such a depopulated area. She was really nice, but she never spoke about herself much. Whenever I told her anything, she would be so happy to hear it. I told her everything. How I was bullied and how I didn't have a mum, etc. Whenever I complained about something, she had a sympathetic ear. I thought of her as a mother, to be completely honest with you. I even told her that, and she looked very sad for a second, then smiled. Sadly, shortly after this I got sick. At first, I thought that it was just a cold, and since I didn't have a fever or anything, I thought I was well enough to go out and play. I hated not being able to see her, and even when I was sick I would go to the usual meeting place to wait for her. But as my illness got worse and worse, my grandpa noticed. I was told to rest at home, but it didn't help at all. Even when I was forced to rest in bed, I wouldn't stop asking about her. I really wanted to see her. I kept on and on about her so much that my grandpa phoned her family home to ask for her. I remember thinking that grandpa was off the phone very quickly. He came back into my bedroom with a concerned look on his face. "Hey you, who have you been playing with? Because it sure ain't the woman I thought. She didn't come back this summer. Do you even know the name of the woman you've been going around with? What kind of person have you been seeing?" I really panicked. I hated being cornered and told off. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't remember her name, and in fact, we didn't even ask each other our names. We had so many other fun things to talk about. He couldn't believe that and demanded to know what she looked like, so I did my best to describe her appearance. Once I did, Grandpa stormed out of the room, back towards the phone. I wondered what the hell the problem was, but now I am older, I realized why he was concerned. We lived way out in the middle of nowhere, and we really didn't get too many strangers in town. Everyone knew one another and one another's business. By the end of the night, no one had a clue who that woman was, and I think that my grandparents suspected that she might not have ever existed. They told me to stop going to meet her, and because I was really ill at the time, I could barely move from bed anyway. After a little while, I got a little better, and I was allowed to play outside my grandparents' house. I always kept an eye out for my friend, even though I knew I would be in so much trouble if I was seen with her. I missed her. A while passed, and I ended up playing in the back garden of my grandparents' home. And then, when I realized that they weren't paying attention to where I was anymore, I went into the field behind the back garden. There was a hole in the fence, and I could sneak into the field and back to the garden pretty easily. The field had a lot more places to search for bugs, and because I got better, I returned to bug hunting since there wasn't much else to do. I was engrossed in looking under the leaves of a small shrub when I heard someone call my name. It wasn't either of my grandparents. It was my friend. She was back. I was so happy that she came back to go bug hunting with me. I was too overjoyed to ask her any of the things my grandpa asked me all those months ago. I was just a kid. I saw that my grandparents spotted me from the window, and I waved at them, and they waved back. Everything was all right again in my little world, it seemed. At dinner time, I said to Grandpa, "Hey, you saw us bug hunting today, right? Why didn't you come and say hello to her?" My grandparents stopped eating and looked at me. "You were playing alone, unless you went off somewhere far, and you know you aren't supposed to do that. But I didn't see you with no her." Their looks of concern didn't fade, and my grandpa went to the phone again, but this time to call my father. He came back and uttered the most heartbreaking sentence I've ever heard. "Look, I'm really sorry. "You're going to go back to your dad." My heart sunk. So I was to be sent away. I had to wait a week before I left, and during that time, I wasn't allowed to go outside. I missed my friends so much, and I hated being indoors after being sick all that time. I was really sad. I was sat on the porch of my grandparents' home, waiting for my dad to come and take me away. I remember crying my eyes out and demanding her to be there because I just wanted to see her one last time. And then, there she was. She appeared out of nowhere. She crouched down and spoke to me. "What's the matter?" Choking on the lump in my throat and fighting against the tears welling in my eyes, I told her that I had to go. "Oh no, don't cry. It's a good thing. I'll be supporting you, just from a distance." I asked her if I would ever see her again, and she looked down and shook her head. My heart ached. She waved goodbye to me with a big smile and walked on out of our garden and out of my life. After that, I went home and went back to school, and I didn't get bullied ever again. I felt so much better. I felt like I was enjoying life for the first time. I understood the beauty of the word normal, and I felt like I could be described as it. I went away, and we didn't go back all that often. With age comes wisdom, and I learned a few things about that area I used to play in. That particular area had been kind of infamous in the past for disappearances, especially child disappearances. Some old texts and rumors say that the kids who didn't make a whole load of friends were the ones to disappear. You know, the loners. I even heard that some of the kids before they disappeared were sick for a bunch of days for some unknown reason. Given all that, I don't care. I never saw her again, and I never knew who she was. She's so important to me though. She might have been a ghost. She might have wanted to spirit me away. She might have been there to protect me from being spirited away. She may have even been an everyday person. It's a little scary now I'm older and I think back on it. But when I was younger, I felt nothing but love for her. She was like the mother I never had and always wanted. It happened a dozen years ago, but I will never forget it. Thank you for listening. Hello watchers and listeners. Happy holidays. I hope you enjoyed this year's collection of wholesome and sad ghost stories. I always find it's a nice reminder to love and appreciate who and what you have. A huge thank you to my fellow narrators who really came through for me this year on such short notice. Words cannot express my gratitude. A huge thank you to all the authors of the stories, and especially to those who submitted their own. To Jane Nightmares for giving me stories to read, and also to the narrators who brought their own stories, since I had trouble sourcing enough stories for this year. I am so proud to be able to work with such great people in such a fantastic community. And of course, the biggest thank you goes to you, the listener. Stay safe this holiday season. And remember,
Papa loves you.